I don't envy directors. This one feels like the movie to end all movies. You might say I'm exaggerating, but I wish I were. Sometimes you come across a piece of media that becomes a sort of a turning point. It somehow manages to make other works seem less thorough or even shallow. And while I know it's not really the case, it sure feels that way in the moment. Paul Thomas Anderson is undeniably one of the best directors working today, but this film stands apart in his already impressive catalog. It's almost like he took a decade's worth of cinematic brilliance, melted it down, and poured it all into this one vessel. And if I had to draw a comparison, I'd say this movie rivals Citizen Kane in its exploration of character and theme. Critics wildly regard it as the best film of its decade, and for a good reason. I'm right there with them. Much like Citizen Kane by Orson Welles, There Will Be Blood functions as a mythic dissection of American ambition, a tale of a man who builds an empire only to die alone, empty, and spiritually gutted. Both films chronicle the life of a towering, self-made figure who ultimately becomes a prisoner of his own legacy. From its opening frames, There Will Be Blood grabs you by the throat, making you feel an overwhelming sense of unease. The tension is palpable. You're sure something terrible is coming, but you're just not sure what. As the story progresses, the unease intensifies, and you know that the impending disaster will not just be an accident, it will be a personal apocalypse. And in a way it absolutely is. It doesn't feel like a parable at first, more like a dry statement that cannot be ignored or denied. It's forcefully pressed against your own existence, and you can't help but ask yourself some questions you'd much prefer not to be posed. What's even better is that you're enthralled with the tried and true narrative method of what happens next. It is, for the lack of a better term, cinematic perfection. Yes, I stand by my words. A truly perfect synergy of masterful cinematography, sound design, impeccable acting, haunting score, and overall inspired direction. A scene like the baptism, where Daniel is forced to publicly renounce his pride, feels less like drama and more like ritualistic sacrifice of a principle. Daniel Day-Lewis delivers a performance that sears itself into your memory, less a character, more an archetype. Paul Dano matches him stride for stride, proving he's a performer of the highest caliber. The supporting cast never drops the ball, creating a world that feels as real as the dust and oil it's built upon. I'd be lying if I told you I absorbed everything on my first viewing. There Will Be Blood begs to be revisited. Even watching it twice in one day is rewarding, though letting it marinate for a while is often the better choice. If you're looking for something that is as thrilling as it is thought-provoking, I'd be hard-pressed to name a better recommendation. Masterpiece is hardly hyperbole here. Maybe lacking in poetry, but in its place it offers something richer, deeper existential philosophy. It is very rare in life when one is spared from facing their choices and beliefs at a later point in their life. It's better we all come prepared. Or, as the Godfather would say, keep your friends close but your existential crisis closer. Would you like a mirror held up to your own worst self? In harmony with its subject matter, the film's visual language is stark, expressive, and ruthlessly efficient. I'm fairly certain that the introduction to There Will Be Blood is taught in film schools worldwide as a masterclass in visual storytelling. We learn everything we need to know about Daniel Plainview before he utters a single word. It's genius. Paul Thomas Anderson's formal approach in There Will Be Blood echoes the classical harsh clarity of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre by John Huston, where the land itself becomes a hostile character testing its protagonists. The visual starkness and spiritual desolation also bring to mind Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, with its vast landscapes and lonely man seeking meaning beneath an indifferent sky. The stark framing and camera work complement the dialogue, which most of the time resembles last words spoken before bullets start tearing through the air. The style is almost harsh, but so is the subject matter. It is a do-or-die, no-compromise race in which every measure capable of providing an advantage is worth giving it a whirl. If some topic is continuously avoided, the choice becomes obvious. You'll have to force the matter on whoever chose to be weak and indecisive. Anderson's camera places us exactly where we need to be, sometimes overpowered by the characters, sometimes swallowed by the landscape. They're almost overwhelming, and it's so by design, almost like a remake of The Seventh Seal, but with fewer chess games and more oil. Every scene is deliberate, every piece of dialogue is almost proclaimed. There Will Be Blood feels at times theatrical without ever stepping over that line. Inspired by Upton Sinclair's book Oil and his own research on the early 20th century independent oilmen, Paul Thomas Anderson was able to turn the first couple of hundred pages from the book into a narrative that turned out to be about something grander than just the happenings of a young and adventurous industry. It bears on preaching to us in a way a very experienced and strict minister would. Think Winterlight, but there'll be explosions. Like Bresson's Diary of a Country Priest, this is a story about a man who doesn't just carry his suffering, it defines him. The narrative unravels quietly, but with the weight of a confessional. We follow Plainview's descent in the same way we follow Bresson's Priest, with a growing awareness that some souls cannot be saved, only observed as they flicker and fade. It's no small task to come face to face with such matters. Supplemented by the fact that the implications come much later in the film, it sneaks up on you. But have no fear, the movie is so gorgeous, the scenes are so well paced and crafted, the performance is so true you cannot help but enjoy it tremendously. Every moment feels as intentional as Bergman's long takes. Speaking of, you can almost feel the influence of Bergman's The Hour of the Wolf here. Both films dive into the human psyche, except one has more oil and less existential dread. The source is inner conflict. What's also awe-inspiring is how incredibly well-paced the subtle and the straightforward are. Some scenes are intense, while others are understated. I read it as the actions that take place and take over the viewer are the product of nuanced scenes that come before, the ones where not much happens and yet there's a storm of equal ferocity hidden just behind the eyes. It's as if the understated moments are loaded into the magazine and the explosive ones run the bolt and pull the trigger. It is late 19th century America. We're witnessing our main character, Daniel Plainview, working solo as a prospector in New Mexico, a man with unshakable resolve. His determination is unwavering, supported by knowledge and self-confidence that most of us will rightfully admire. Daniel is mistrusting and standoffish. Even when injured and in need of medical help, his priority is still his business. It doesn't take him too long to come up with an outfit that is already hard at work developing an oil well when disaster strikes. He loses a worker and adopts an orphan. Soon after, he's approached by a young man who's seeking to sell some information on an oil deposit. Whether the information is valid is yet to be determined. It then becomes a power play of battling ambitions and colliding ideologies. Masters of business, manipulation, power-hungry, sharp-minded, proud people face off in an unending struggle for wealth and influence. The means to totally opposing ends. Their goals might seem similar, but the difference will be almost shocking at the end. The sacrifices made will seem ludicrous. And yet, there will be no doubt that every decision made was deliberate and passionate. Their life could not lead down another path. We're witnessing blood spilled at almost every turn, intentionally and not. But the proverbial blood is the epiphany of a lifelong chain of events, and decisions finally running as a stream on the ground to solidify the grim outcome of an unending struggle. The arc of Daniel Plainview is reminiscent of Michael Corleone in The Godfather, a man who begins with justifications and ends with delusions. Both characters believe they can control the cost of power, only to discover they've traded away the last parts of their humanity in exchange for a throne made of ash. You can see it as a greater justice or simply a logical outcome to events and choices made, but both adversaries, who had a competition in them, will eventually get what they deserve. It's like a twisted game of chess, but instead of knights you have a broken leg and a bottle of bourbon. The incomparable inner strength of Daniel is immediately apparent to us from the very beginning. A lesser man would not make it back to civilization with a broken leg. He merely tells Paul Sunday that if the information he sold is not legit, he will find him. That's all he has to say. At this point in the film, we, as well as Paul, are convinced that even though it will be not worth $500 to halt the grip on his operation just to seek out the man who deceived him, Daniel will do it out of pride or a sense of higher justice. He does not believe in God, but he only believes in himself, and this faith is not entirely misplaced. Losing a worker also serves as a glimpse into the other side of Mr. Plainview. It is not the aftermath, but his immediate reaction to what happens that characterizes Daniel as a person. He is above all else a human being, a victim of his own desires and aspirations. At this particular moment, he is driven by our nature to protect the young, maybe even a wish to have a family, someone he can actually trust without any reservations. His own blood is probably the only ground stable enough to establish trust, but inevitably calculation in search of profit and advantage in competition takes over. It's a great pretense to pose himself as a family man, even better, a single father. Later we faced with his recreancy in the face of another unfortunate accident that takes his son hearing. Proving our prior concerns, his attitude towards his partner and son, his heir and only confidant, changes drastically. The boy becomes an inconvenience. HW is too much work. Nothing will be done if the focus is on his ailment. Daniel makes the most profoundly hypocritical choice, getting rid of HW by sending him away to San Francisco. We later confirm our suspicion that Plainview is longing for someone close in his life. It's not romantic, it's just plain trust in at least one person in the entire world. Even the strongest of us are unable to survive mentally when we cannot share it with at least someone. Getting his little brother back, and then being overwhelmed by betrayal and acting on impulse, Daniel is driven by the strength of his character and his emotions. The very nature that served him so well before it takes over and fills him with pain. The legal implications are the least of his worries. He's going down the path from very few have ever turned. This could have been a rom-com, but here we are. The psycho-spiritual unraveling in There'll Be Blood shares a kinship with The Hour of the Wolf. Yep, I'm dragging Ingmar Bergman into my video again. Where madness becomes a kind of a moral mirror. In both, reality thins out as the characters isolate themselves, consumed by visions, guilt, and the unbearable knowledge of what they're capable of. So, which one's the fiercest? The outer conflict and competing beliefs, ideas and aspirations, or the ones that roar within us? My stance is that by far the latter. It's hard to deny the decay of the last remnants of the great frontier on display in There'll Be Blood. The West is no longer wild. There's nothing left to conquer or subdue. There's only other man's will. It's been tamed, parceled out and buried beneath pipelines and property lines, just like Daniel's soul. The land may have been conquered, but the man who conquered it was conquered too, by himself. Its manifest destiny turned inward, and Daniel's destiny was always to become a cautionary tale wielding a bowling pin. The juxtaposition of capitalism and religion, said to be so characteristic of the United States, has actually been there since the First Empire. It might have worn other names, but it was always greed and avarice versus the good and benevolence. Is this eternal conflict directed outward? At a quick glance, definitely. It's what becomes apparent sooner. However, the inner turmoil is where it all stakes in. The price is our soul. Whether we like it or not, it's always our soul we gamble on. Men with no attachments, not knowing or outright denying their ancestry, refuse to accept themselves and suffer the only possible outcome. Whether it's Plainview's contempt towards people around him he considers lesser or inferior, or Sunday who sees them as tools or currency, Both approaches are desperately cynical. The good, represented by HW, quietly fades away by saying what they feel has to be said. Independence is the virtue that only Daniel can enjoy. Allowing it to others is losing control. Calling it competition falls short, becoming a petty and obvious excuse. Even a confession is met with a disappointment and bitterness, instead of acknowledging how difficult it must have been. What good is trust if it's only one directional? It's the position of perfectionism. Adoption is only worth it if some advantage or profit can be extracted from it. It's all about business. Never mind the cynicism. The sheer implausibility of such an approach is never obvious. The way both adversaries are dismantled in the end is a harsh reminder to every one of us that we're still but animals. Until the whole paradigm of human being is shifted, it will remain as is. And if that doesn't feel like the seventh seal, I don't know what does. There's a lot of room for interpretation in There'll Be Blood. Every viewer is free to draw upon it as deep as he or she wants. If not for all that was stated above, this movie succeeds in making one contemplate. Thankfully, in a case of a film that isn't rushing, we have plenty of time to consider it before coming to conclusions. It's just like fine wine, but a lot darker. Okay, Captain Obvious here, this movie might not be for everyone, but if you want something that's intellectually stimulating and emotionally intense, There'll Be Blood is the ideal film. The trials we face may seem unique to us, although we all face our worst enemy every day. Whether we blindly follow our nature or go against it, it's best we recognize it sooner than later, and either challenge it or welcome it knowingly, understanding who we are and accepting our heritage and our own selves. There Will Be Blood is a perfect depiction of the consequence of inner conflict spilling out onto the lives of people. The famous I have a competition in me line that is so simple and, if most of us is truly honest with ourselves, profoundly relatable. It is a gorgeously presented and executed modern day parable that will stand the test of time, there is not a shadow of a doubt about it. And unlike Bresson's Diary of Country Priest's timeless depiction of the solitude of faith that eventually brings solace, Anderson's There'll Be Blood is a warning to anyone overflowing with hubris and contempt alongside with greed and desire to use ones around. This mindset is doomed eternally, but there's always time to reconsider, until it's too late. It drags that truth into the open, bloodied and flailing, and asks you to watch, not as a spectator, but as a participant. And when it's over, when the last line echoes, I'm finished, you know it means more than the end of a man or an empire. It's a verdict on what happens when a soul is consumed by its own furnace. It's a reckoning. Like Kim Ki-duk's Pietà, There'll Be Blood confronts us with the brutal cost of capitalism, not through didactic messaging, but by stripping characters down to their most animal impulses. In both films, human connection becomes transactional, then corrosive, and yet something sacred still flickers in the ruins. Anderson and Kim are both interested in the paradox of violence, how it destroys meaning and yet sometimes becomes the only language we have left. And what's left when the oil runs dry is the man you truly are.